Bloodstained Curse of the Moon 2 was a bit of a surprise announcement a few weeks ago, coming out of nowhere with a release date only about 2 weeks later. A sequel to 2018's classic Castlevania-inspired retro revival, which was itself a companion to the Metroidvania-styled Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, what does Curse of the Moon 2 do to add on to and improve upon the original? And, more importantly, is it worth the increased $15 asking price, and should you give it a buy, even if you haven't played the other games? Thanks to an early copy of the PC version provided by Inti Creates, I'm here to help you answer just that. The short answer is, Curse of the Moon 2 is an excellent improvement upon the original Curse's base, but on top of a couple remaining quirks, the game sort of misleads you into thinking that there's more content in this package than there actually is. If you'll indulge me for a moment, that's what I want to tackle first. See, Curse of the Moon 2 is laid out in an episodic, chapter-based structure. Within each chapter, you'll trek through 8 linear levels with a growing cast of playable characters, slaying demons in order to save the world. Each character will have his or her regular attacks and a few different sub-weapons unique to that character, and each character has his or her own health bar. This means that by the end of the game, you can swap between 4 or more characters in the middle of battle, and it opens up so much strategy during boss fights and repeat playthroughs. Is Zangetsu low on health? Perhaps it's time to swap over to this game's tank character, Hachi, the corgi dog in a mech suit. Yes, that's a thing I just said. It's amazing, and I love him so much. Need to jump over some treacherous bottomless pits? Maybe you should switch over to Dominique, who's got a higher jump, or just use Hachi's hover ability because again, dog in a suit of armor, this game is amazing. If any character dies though, you'll be reset to the very start of the room you were in, and you won't be able to use that character again until you either beat the level, use Dominique's revive ability that you can only really find in 2 or 3 levels, or until every character dies. In the latter case, you'll lose one of your retries and start back at the last checkpoint that you passed. If your favorite character dies during a particularly tough room, or one that they're best suited for, you're really gonna feel the pain of missing them as you struggle through and have to tweak your strategy on the fly. If you've ever even slightly dabbled in the old-school NES-styled Castlevania games, Curse of the Moon 2 picks up right where those games left off. However, and this is the reason I wanted to mention this first, the game makes no attempt to tell you that the later episodes only contain slightly modified versions of those same 8 levels. When I first started the game up and I saw that there were several chapters below the first on the file select, I was giddy with excitement, thinking that this game would be a much longer affair than the original's 2 hours or so of total game time. And as I played through Curse 2, that excitement only grew, thanks to its stellar, sometimes tough but almost always fair gameplay, its greatly improved level design over its predecessor, and Inti's ever-present beautiful sprite work and sound design. So when I finished the 8th and final level, when I took down the final boss, which I won't be showing here out of respect for spoilers, and when the game challenged me with saving a major character in Episode 2, I was so ready for more, only to be tossed right back into level 1 with a couple tweaks here and there. And then when I beat all 8 levels over again, fought a new final boss, and even got the good ending, a final chapter opened up which, I bet you can take a guess, starts off by asking you to play these same 8 levels once again with pretty marginal tweaks to enemy placement. For example, in episodes 2 onward, most bosses have maybe one different attack, or a slightly different lingering effect after one of the attacks that wasn't there before, and that's it actually. Episodes 1 and 2 to the untrained eye are more or less identical, the only difference being the makeup of your playable cast. In Episode 1, like in Curse 1 before it, you start out with one playable character, in this case the swordsman Zangetsu, and then you unlock new additions over the course of the first few levels, each of whom have their own abilities, strengths, and weaknesses. In Episode 2, you've got essentially the same cast of characters, except now they're unlocked from the start, which means that you can access alternate paths in the early levels using those characters that you may not have had so early the last time around. But even then, by level 4 or so, you'll be right where you had all of these characters in the previous playthrough, meaning that the last half of the game is pretty much identical. It's a little bit underwhelming solely thanks to how it's packaged. Having 4, arguably 5 different playthroughs worth of content, even if that content is mostly similar, is awesome. But the fact that the game just wants you to play the same adventure at least 3 times to truly beat it, and that it hides that behind the promise of a longer journey, feels a little bit misleading. In fact, this is why I think that this 8-bit styled platforming game is for some reason under a very strictly timed review embargo despite having very little by way of story. The game comes out today, July 10th, and in fact, there's a chance that some of you have already bought it before a single review was allowed to be published. It's always dubious when a game's put under so late a review embargo because it usually implies that the publisher is trying to hide something under the surface, and sadly, in Curse 2's case, that seems to be a bit true. If this content was tucked away as a bonus at the start of the adventure rather than flaunted as a significant part of the core game, I think that Curse 2 would set itself up far better, because as it stands, it feels to me like the game attempts to set a lofty expectation for how much content it provides, which leaves it over-promising as a result. Now again, this says nothing about the quality of that game content, which, as we'll get into in a moment, is fantastic. I just want you to go in with the right expectation if you do choose to buy the game, and I still think that you should buy this game so long as you know what you're getting into. That expectation should be about 2 to 3 hours worth of content, maybe slightly longer than Curse 1's total runtime, just for $5 more and with several alternative modes of play as you beat the different episodes. Altogether, to see everything that Curse 2 has to offer, not counting the upcoming boss rush mode that's on its way as a free update, you'll have to play through the game no fewer than 5 times, including a full second playthrough of Episode 2 to get both the good ending, which unlocks the final episode, and the bad ending, which unlocks the bonus EX episode. As a reviewer, this puts me in a weird position compared to the regular player, and I'm not gonna judge the game harshly for having this sort of gameplay approach. If this were provided back in the classic NES days, this would be almost revolutionary. A game that you can play 5 full times and have things change every single time? That's awesome, and if you take a break from the game in between episodes, this reused content isn't going to matter much to you at all. For a reviewer like myself, though, this means that I'm expected to beat the same game 4 times in a row just to see if maybe there's an actual final level at the very end. I'm here to tell you today, in the spirit of transparency, that I haven't done that yet, in part thanks to a save file corruption that wiped out my entire first run of Episode 1. I'm hoping that was just a freak accident, but I do feel obligated to mention it because for all I know, save corruptions might be a common occurrence. I've beaten both Episodes 1 and 2, including beating the first 5 or 6 levels of Episode 1 twice thanks to that corrupted save. I've unlocked the true final episode and played a portion of that, and I've conversed with a friend of mine who happened to get the bad ending and the bonus EX chapter. Even if I had gotten to the complete true final ending for real this time, I promise, I wasn't going to be able to talk about it without spoiling the game anyway, so it's not like this is going to significantly add or detract from my recommendation. With all of that said, I absolutely love the gameplay of Curse 2, although again, I wish the episodes were laid out a bit differently. With so many different characters, and with each level having unique alternate paths based on which characters you've got in your party, I would really have loved to be able to play as more of these characters at different points. When I was in Episode 2, playing those first few levels again from a different character's perspective was probably the most fun I had in that entire run. Seeing an entirely different set of rooms because I could crawl through a small gap with Robert, or just break the entire floor with Hachi, because again, Hachi is amazing, kept me searching for alternative playstyles, and the game really loves to tease you with routes and shortcuts that you won't have access to for 2, 3, maybe even 4 full playthroughs. Despite that bummer though, just learning the mechanics and feeling myself improving as I played through the game again and again was more rewarding than I would have expected. Figuring out an easier way through a tough room is pretty common, but it never gets old. And altogether, Curse 2's level design is just plain more fun than the first games. Curse 1 felt like what you'd expect a modern take on the old-school Castlevania formula would be. It was a bit modernized, but it was still very archaic by design. Many rooms would feel like you were forced to take cheap hits from enemies that you can't do much about, but in Curse 2, the game really does feel competent with any of the several playable characters. Now, even with the health upgrades you'll find throughout the game, a few of the characters will still have incredibly low health, which means that you probably won't beat the game with any one character, but you're not supposed to. Later on, some jumps can get a little bit tight for the lower jumpers, and in one level that means you're going to find yourself waiting on moving platforms for way longer than you really should have to, but that's all kind of part of Curse 2's charm. Using your cast of characters together in harmony is endlessly rewarding. I just wish it didn't take a few playthroughs for you to start having more control over which characters you unlock and when. And for those of you that may be new to these games, in addition to the new local co-op feature that lets you and a buddy try and slay demons together, Curse 2, like the first game before it, has an optional casual difficulty, which removes the infamous Castlevania knockback as well as the limited number of retries that you have. I can honestly say that you probably won't need this because Curse 2 isn't actually that difficult outside of a few choice moments, mainly boss fights. There aren't really that many bottomless pits for you to fall into to begin with, and they're mostly left for the second half of the game once you're comfortable with the controls. I've personally only dabbled in the Classicvania games, and even on Veteran, I found this game very light on frustration and maybe even a bit easier than I've expected, although that's definitely not a bad thing. For episode 2 onward, I did swap to the casual mode just because knowing that I might have to play the same game 3 more times wasn't inspiring me to challenge myself when I'd already done it once before, and the lack of knockback really does turn this game into a cakewalk. The infinite retries are super nice for when you really want or need a specific character to help you through an area, but you keep dying with that character on the way. That said, you can definitely manage without them, and I think in my entire time playing, I got one game over when I struggled on a boss that I just couldn't figure out until much later on. Even then, a game over just starts you right back at the beginning of the level. Defeating enemies and destroying lanterns will give you treasure as well, which in the classic difficulty goes towards giving you an extra retry. All in all, it's actually kind of hard to get a game over during the hardest points of the game, because Curse 2 drops so much treasure that by the time your whole party is dead, you probably got another retry, and I really appreciated this. This sort of dangling carrot kept me trying during a level when I was just ready to exit out and swap to casual mode for just that level, and each time I tried, I learned a little bit more and got a little bit better. Curse 2 could have easily thrown a wall somewhere in there, a relic of the Classicvania difficulty that would risk turning new players off in the name of appealing to those veterans of the genre, but I'm really glad that it didn't. It may look and play like an older game, but Curse 2 injects so much life into the style that it becomes a game that any platforming fan should pick up, even if you didn't play or maybe didn't like Curse 1's more classic-inspired design elements. So all in all, thanks to those difficulty options and the game's great design, once again I would say that you should buy Bloodstained Curse of the Moon 2. My biggest reservation is the way that the game presents its amount of content, because it really does have a lot of content despite that 3-hour runtime. With later playthroughs giving you a little bit more story, different party makeups, and different characters, Inti Creates milked just about everything it could out of this little game, and for $15 you'll get your money's worth by playing it even just 2 times. Again, I just wish they'd positioned this content a little bit differently so that it doesn't get players' expectations and hopes up a bit more than they should be. But with that said, with some hiccups here and there, this young series is already 3 for 3, and I'm really excited to see where it goes from here. If you'd like to hear more about Bloodstained, by the way, stay tuned for my next video as I'll be diving into the original Bloodstained, not Curse of the Moon 1, but Ritual of the Night, to see how that game is faring 1 year after its release, to see which Kickstarter promises the developer has fulfilled, which ones are on the way, which ones have been cancelled, and whether this game, the second biggest Kickstarter game ever, has truly lived up to its lofty promises. It's going to be a lot of fun to dig into, so if you're not already, make sure you're subscribed so you can keep up to date right when it lands. As always, thank you very much for watching. A special thanks to my Patreon producers including Goldstorm07, Wolf Chaosan, and Buckles Chucklow, and until next time, stay golden.